Welcome back to my channel, or I suppose if you're new here, welcome to my channel. Hi, I'm Georgia. This is going to be my final 10 books I've read recently video of 2022. I keep track of every single book I read via YouTube videos. That's it. Literally for the last 3 years, I've documented every single book I've read via YouTube, mostly over on my main YouTube channel. The link for that will be down below if anybody isn't subscribed to that, if you've somehow found my second channel before finding my main channel. And now this is my book channel, so it's all on there instead. I just like to give you guys a full, honest review of each and every book I read, and then you guys can let me know what you think in the comments, and then we can talk about other book recommendations, and it's just a really nice sort of little community to be a part of, and I really enjoy it. So welcome to my final one of 2022, because I don't think I'm gonna be able to film another one, read enough books by the end of the year. As I'm filming this, it is the 15th of December, which means 2022 is officially over in 16 days time, which is terrifying. I'm sure this year only just began, but no, we're at the end. As of right now, I've read 54 out of 55 books on my Goodreads goal so far. I have a feeling that I might just be able to hit that goal of 55 books. Maybe. I might be able to read it in 16 days. I don't know why this has been such a good year for my reading. I really don't. Usually I hit 20 books if I'm lucky. This year, 55. Don't ask me how I did it. I don't really know. I've just clearly read a lot. I really don't know how. I work a full-time job, I have horses, I've moved into and bought a new house, and we've renovated or decorated the whole house. And somehow I've read 55 books. Am I Superwoman? Maybe, I might be. But with that, let me start telling you about the books I've read. The first one is this one right here. Every single time I comment on how I should just put these in order, and I just never do it. This book, My Policeman by Bethan Roberts. I only read this book because of the Harry Styles movie, but I wanted to read the book before I watched the movie because that's always the way around I like to do it. I fell in love with this so deeply. I gave this a 4.5 stars, I think, but maybe I was just being really stingy that day because this could easily be a 5-star read. I actually really wanted to do a comparison video between the book and the movie, but then I actually got around to sitting down and planning it, and I just didn't really know how to structure a video like that, so I just never did it. But believe you me, both of them are pretty good. How would I describe this book? I think the main words that spring to mind when I think about this book is queer trauma. It is just pure queer trauma. So this is the story of a woman called Marion, and she has basically been in love with her best friend's older brother forever, and he's called Tom. And eventually she manages to weasel her way into Tom's life, and they start dating. Except Tom's not very forthcoming with how much he likes her. She thinks he's just very shy, but he's never he won't really kiss her or hold hands, but she thinks they're dating. And turns out that Tom is actually gay, and Tom is in love with this other man called Patrick. But this book is set in the 1950s in Brighton, and of course in the 1950s in the UK, it was very much illegal to be gay, so Tom couldn't exactly come out and be I'm in love with Patrick. So Tom and Patrick are having this affair behind Marion's back. Marion and Tom end up getting married because that's just what you're expected to do in those times. And it's just a story of heartbreak. Heartbreak from every single direction. Oh, and Tom is a policeman, hence the title, My Policeman. All of the characters in this book are just so deeply complex, and you want to be mad at everyone. You want to be mad at Marion for being so blinded by love that she couldn't actually see how Tom treated her wasn't all that good. You want to be angry at Tom for being a bit mean to Marion, but he's just very internally confused, and he's very internally homophobic. He doesn't really know what to do with all these feelings. He knows that what he is illegal. He's a policeman, but he just wants to conform. He wants to conform to society, and he wants to be married, and he wants all that, but he also wants to have his cake and eat it too, with Patrick on the side. And then you want to be angry at Patrick because Patrick knows that Tom's married to Marion, and he continues having this affair anyway. And Bethan Roberts writes these characters in such a way that you are furious at all of them. They're all bad people, but they're not bad people, they're just people. She just writes people really well with all of their complexities and all of their layers. And I cried in this book so many times. I suppose at the very core of it, you just want to be mad at society, at the government, at this law that made homosexuality illegal, that sort of destroyed so many people's lives. Like, this, obviously, it's fiction, but this is based in real life. This happened all the time. There were so many women who found themselves in marriages to gay men who suffered because of that, and the gay men suffered and the women suffered, but there wasn't any other way to be. That's just how society expected you to be. And oh, I literally, this is like my bread and butter, like queer history. It really gets me in my soul. This is set in Brighton. Brighton is my favourite place in the whole world, maybe just after New York, but Brighton is very much up there. Part of my soul lives in Brighton, and today it's such a wonderful, accepting city full of so much vibrance and queer culture and queer life. Like, if you are gay in the UK, you want to be in Brighton. It is the place to be. It really is truly magical. And to read about the city that I love so much, that's so accepting and so wonderful through the lens of 1950s, it's really heartbreaking. I read one review on Goodreads, and that's my toxic trait. I always have to read Goodreads reviews of books after I've read them. I don't know why, I just always do it. But I read this one review, and it was basically this girl saying that this book is just like queer trauma, and she doesn't understand why it needs to be so upsetting. I literally wrote the comment down. Like, she was very upset basically that it was a tragedy. And I understand when you're queer, you don't necessarily always want to read about all the upsetting things that queer people have had to go through in history. Like, I get it, it's a lot, but you've got to understand queer history for what it was, and the things that people overcame, the adversity that people overcame for our community to be where we are today in the Western world. And this isn't the case all over the world. Like, people still live in the world like they had to do in My Policeman, like they had to do in the 1950s here. Like, this is very much still a modern thing that some people in some countries have to endure. And I think it's so important to tell these stories. Like, it's not queer trauma porn, as she called it. It's history. It's queer history. What else do I have to say about the story? I suppose a pretty important thing I should probably tell you is this is like a multiple timeline kind of thing. Quite important. So the whole premise of this book is that Marion and Tom are now in their old age, and Patrick is also in his old age, and they haven't seen Patrick in many, many years. But Marion has decided to take Patrick in after he had a really bad stroke and he can't do anything for himself. And so Marion, for whatever reason, decided to become Patrick's carer. So now Patrick is in the house with Marion and Tom. Tom's refusing to see him, refusing to talk to him. And it's Marion basically telling Patrick her and Tom's story from when they were younger, from those early days. And so basically the book is told in flashbacks. I'm not going to tell you any more than that because I don't want to spoil why Patrick is there, why Marion feels like she needs to do this for him. It's just a really beautiful book. I think the reason why I didn't give it 5 full stars is it's not entirely compelling to read. It's not one of those books that you put down and then you're immediately like, oh, I need to carry on. I need to finish reading this right now. I think because it is such a heavy topic, such a heavy subject, it is the kind of book that you have to read quite slowly. You've got to put it down. You've got to have your space to yourself to think it through and then pick it up again. So it did take me quite a long time to read this, but it's beautiful. It's beautifully written. I have already told you quite a lot about my opinions. Oh dear. On this book. This is Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. I've spoken about this in multiple videos, so I'm going to keep this one quite short, and I'll link down below where I've spoken about it in full. This is the story of a woman called Kiko. Story of a woman called Kiko. She has worked in the same convenience store for 18 years since she was 18 years old, so she's now 36. And Kiko can't understand why everyone in her life seems to be so dissatisfied with the fact that she is a 36-year-old woman working a dead-end job in a convenience store. She doesn't want anything for her life. She's very, very content getting up, going to work, living the same routine every single day. And her whole family's on at her about getting married and having children, having a career, and she just doesn't want that. Reading between the lines of this book, it very much comes across that Kiko is neurodivergent, probably autistic, but it never explicitly says that. I'm very interested. In my last video where I spoke about this, I had a lot of autistic people give me their opinions of this book in the comments. Some of them really liked it, some of them didn't so much. That was really interesting, but I suppose nobody's experience on this planet is the same as anyone else's. This book is jarring, I think is the best word for it. I actually gave this book 3 stars. I didn't hate it, I didn't love it. I thought it was very like middle of the road. Some people love this book so much, but I think one of the main reasons why I couldn't gel with it is because of the humour in it. It's very like absurdist humour, and that's just not my style of humour at all. I think if you're a fan of like the Mighty Boosh kind of style, this book might be right up your street. But I just found this like genuinely concerning at points. Like I'm a very highly anxious person, and some of the decisions Kiko makes in this book, like I was sweating for her. I was literally like sweating, palms are sticky, like heartbeat racing. I just really struggled to get through it because I found it so anxiety inducing, which probably says a lot for the writing. Like Sayaka Murata's writing in this is clearly amazing for me to like react so viscerally to it. But it was a stressful experience all around. At one point, Kiko takes in this man into her house. At no point does she like think about the safety implications of doing so. She just like lets him move in. And this guy is like clearly very incel kind of vibes, like not right at all, has some really concerning opinions and thoughts on the world. And I found his character really like repetitive. He just kept saying the same sentence over and over and over again. And that made me just so anxious. There's no character arc here, there's not even really much of a storyline, it's just a study of Kiko as a character. If that's your kind of style, like if you're really into like character-based stories, you'll probably really like this. If you need a plot to like push you through to the end, this probably isn't one for you. The message at the end of this book is pretty much like, don't change for anyone, which is a cute message, and I see where Sayaka Murata is trying to go with that, but it just doesn't make for a very compelling read, I don't think. Although I must say, this is a really short book. It's literally only like 160 pages. If it was like double that length, like a full regular size book, and Sayaka Murata really dove into Kiko's character a bit more, I think I probably would have liked it more. But I think because it was so short and so snappy, you miss a lot of the context. But maybe that's just me. I probably should have said this at the beginning of the video, but please do excuse my appearance in this video. My hair is just not playing ball. I've got so many baby hairs that were literally like sticking out here like little devil horns, and I've tried to like pin them down, but I'm just like so fluffy. My hair doesn't usually do that, so I don't really know what's gone on. But yeah, I'm just a bit of a mess. Also, I'm wearing my Coca-Cola Christmas jumper with the Coke lorry on it. Anyone who knows me knows that I am a avid full-fat Coke drinker. So this is my Christmas jumper of choice, and I've had to put on this little like turtleneck underneath because it's so cold in this house. We are being so strict with the heating because we just cannot afford to have the heating on all the time. Like we can't afford to do it right now. So very cold in this house at all times. So please excuse all the layers. I just really love how the British government this winter like making people choose between like food and heating. Like, it's so quirky of them. I just really love it. Like, the Tories just, they're doing such a good job at running this country. They're doing so good. Sarcasm, by the way. That is not the Tories. Anyway, next up we have The Family Remains by Lisa Jewell, which I do not have to show you because I read it on my Kindle. Again, this is another one that I read as part of another video, so I'll link that again down below. It was actually the same video for Convenience Store Woman. I'll link it down below if you want the full review. But this is actually the sequel to The Family Upstairs by Lisa Jewell. So if you've read The Family Upstairs, you have to read this book. I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was just as well done as the original one was. This is a direct continuation of the first book, so it literally picks up pretty much the moment the first one leaves off. This book, or The Family Upstairs, was never actually meant to have a sequel to it. Lisa Jewell wrote it as like an all-encompassing book. When that book did so well, it kind of went viral, people really loved it. She decided to write the sequel, which is The Family Remains, and it really was just as well done. So I suppose I should give you like a synopsis of The Family Remains, Family Upstairs. I'll give you a synopsis of both. So The Family Upstairs is about this house in Chelsea in London, which is like worth many millions of pounds, and a girl called Libby is her name. I'm so bad at remembering like the names or characters in books. I'm sure she's called Libby. She finds out when she's 25 years old that she has inherited this very expensive house. Only there's a bit of a weird history behind it. So Libby was found in this house when she was still a baby, in a crib. She was clearly very well cared for, very loved. She was very well nourished. Only she was the only person alive in this house. There are multiple dead bodies downstairs. And the question has always been, how did all these people downstairs end up dead? The police kind of put it down to a murder-suicide. but how did Libby remain so healthy when these dead bodies had clearly been there a while, like somebody had been looking after her? So that's the mystery you're kind of trying to solve in The Family Upstairs. The Family Remains hits off exactly where this leaves off. It kind of focuses on different characters, whereas the first one's very much about Libby. The second one focuses more on Henry, who is a relation of Libby's. I'm not going to say exactly how, I really don't want to spoil anything. It's going to be really hard to talk about the second book actually without spoiling anything from the first, but it focuses more on a character called Henry, and Henry is a little bit mentally unwell, let's say. He's like very concerning to read about as the reader, and he's making some questionable choices that other family members of his are trying to stop him from doing. This is really creepy. I'd say the second book is much more creepy than the first, just because you're inside Henry's head, and like I said, he's clearly mentally unwell, and so it just has this really unsettling vibe to it. But strangely, you do actually end up rooting for Henry in a very odd way. If you read it, you'll get what I mean. I was really, really impressed with how Lisa Jewell was able to write the second book. So like I said, she didn't write the first one intending for there to ever be a sequel. And I didn't think there was going to be anything more you could say after that first book. I thought that was going to be everything. It was rounded off really, really nicely. And I was very impressed with how in The Family Remains, there was still more storylines to be answered that you didn't realise were there to be answered. Like, she brings in some other characters, some new characters that really help round out the stories of the first book. I really don't know how to say this without spoiling it. Anyway, it's really good. If you haven't read The Family Upstairs, do that and then read The Family Remains. Then we have The Vanishing Act of Esme Lennox by Maggie O'Farrell. I have never heard of this book before, but I actually went to a book warehouse sale a few months ago. It's a place called 66 Books in Hemel Hempstead. They sell loads and loads of books at literally like 70% off. If you're near Hemel Hempstead, highly recommend. But I picked this one up because I thought the blurb sounded really interesting. So it's Edinburgh in the 30s, the Lennox family having trouble with their youngest daughter. Esme is outspoken, unconventional, and repeatedly embarrasses them in polite society. Something will have to be done. Years later, a young woman named Iris Lockhart receives a letter informing her that she has a great aunt in a psychiatric hospital who is about to be released. That is like the loudest plane ever going over my house. So obviously Iris's great aunt who's being released is Esme Lennox, and the question is, why has Iris never heard of her great aunt before? Why is she in the psychiatric hospital? And it turns out Esme has been in this psychiatric hospital for 60 years, so she has no concept of the outside world at all. And this story very much flickers between the past and the present, so it goes back to Esme. It follows you literally from as a toddler child all the way up until she gets put into the psychiatric hospital at the age of, I think she was 16. And then you've got Iris now and her life, which is kind of falling apart as Iris comes into it. And you're basically trying to piece together what happened in those 60 years. The big question is Esme truly insane? Like, did she deserve, I say deserve, but like, you get what I mean, her time in the psychiatric hospital? Or is this just a case of injustice? This is a story full of unreliable narrators. They've got Esme, who's very dotty with her story, having spent 60 years in a hospital. She doesn't really know up from down, left from right. She doesn't have a clue what's going on. And then you've got the story of Esme's sister as well, Kitty, who's Iris's grandmother. And Kitty is suffering with dementia. And as Iris is going to Kitty to try and get the story about this long-lost sister, Kitty's she's not really with it. She has no idea what's going on, but you sort of slowly start to piece together the true story through Kitty's stories and Esme's stories. This has a really beautiful sort of like backdrop, so it's sort of set between India, where Esme and Kitty grew up, and then they moved to Scotland when they're like young children. And so it sort of has these really two beautiful backdrops to the story. And then I can't actually remember where Iris lives, but it's somewhere by the sea, which is quite nice. The ending for this book is incredibly jarring. Like, it's really, really strange how it ends. It's very much open to the reader's interpretation, I think. It's very unexpected, but I suppose that's life, is kind of the moral that Maggie O'Farrell was trying to get across with this. I did enjoy it. I didn't love it. I gave it 3 stars. But moving on to a very solid 4-star read, we have The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett. This is one of those books that's kind of viral. Everyone has read this book, or everyone's heard of this book. And you know what? It really does deserve the hype. Like, this story has really stuck with me. I must admit, it took me a while to like really get into it. I probably read about like a good fifth of the book before I actually actively wanted to know what happened next. So I really did have to fight through those first few pages. But once I was in it, like, I was really in it. Please excuse my phone buzzing away. Let me just put it on Do Not Disturb. There you go. So this is about identical twin sisters, Desiree and Stella, who grow up to lead completely different lives. So they grow up until the age of 16 in this small town in southern USA. It's this black town. They are black girls who are basically, the town's bred itself. So people are as light-skinned as possible. Like with each generation, you purposefully try and have lighter skinned children. And I'm sure nowadays that would be incredibly problematic. Like, there's a lot of like psychology you can look into with that, but in this time, that's kind of what this town prided itself on. I think the first few chapters, like when the when the twins are teenagers, it's like the 1950s, 1960s, maybe even earlier than that. So that's the town they come from. So Desiree and Stella, they are black, but they're very, very light skinned. Like, they can pass as white. And that's the plot of the book. So when the twins turn 16, they run away to the nearest town. Again, can't remember the town. I'm so sorry. I really need to like start refreshing myself on the storylines before I talk about these books. But I know enough. So the twins run away at age 16. It's this big scandal in this small town. They go to this nearest city, and from there, their lives just go in completely opposite directions. Desiree eventually ends up meeting this really dark-skinned black man, and they go on to have a child together called Jude. Only the man she marries, I think he's called Sam, is really abusive. So Desiree ends up running away from her husband and goes back to the hometown where she moves back in with their mum, who she hasn't seen in years. Whereas Stella, you find out, went the complete opposite direction, and she took advantage of being so light-skinned, and she started passing as white. So she lived her entire adult life as a white woman, married to a white man. She had a child who very much passed as white, who thought she was white. And it's the story, sort of like, you're learning the story of these two women sort of parallel to each other and how differently their lives turned out. But this is a story that spans multiple generations. So as time goes on, you start to learn the stories of Desiree and Stella's daughters as well, whose lives actually cross paths one day, and they eventually figure out that they are cousins. Only Jude is really, really dark skinned because of her dad, and her cousin, whose again, name escapes me right now, is white. She thinks she's white. Like, this is a story of generational trauma, colorism, racism. You've got stories in the deep south all the way to California from the 1950s all the way through to like the present day. It covers everything. Jude's boyfriend that she meets as well, who she meets I think in the 80s, also turns out to be a transgender man. And this is where I feel this book kind of lost a star for me, but hear me out. I think in bringing in Reese, the trans character, Brit Bennett has tried to sort of like draw parallels between the experience of having to hide who you are in terms of your race and having to hide who you are in terms of your gender. And I love that, don't get me wrong, but I do feel like Brit Bennett tried to squeeze so much into this book. She tried to sort of share so many messages with the reader that the trans storyline, it just didn't really land the way it should have done. And I feel like me being so involved in the queer community, that's kind of something that I would like to see more of in a book like this. But again, that is just from my position where I am in the world. Like, I feel like the message Brit Bennett was trying to get across here with the character of Reese, who is a female to male transgender person, is the message of like being able to pass in a society that doesn't accept you. Only I do have questions as to whether Reese would have been able to pass so easily in 1980s, 1990s America. Reese didn't have access to any sort of like medical transitioning. This was a world in which nobody really understood being transgender. Transgender was barely a word at this point in time. And I just really wish it had delved deeper into that, because it kind of felt like it was too easy for Reese in a way. Like, not too easy. I'm doing a really bad job at trying to like get across what I'm saying without being cancelled. I don't know, it just kind of feels like she brought in the trans character to draw these parallels and for like inclusivity, which is amazing, never ever gonna knock that. But I just feel like they should have delved deeper into Reese as a character. It all felt very, very surface level, which I think is my problem with it. I don't know, I'm really struggling to like articulate what I'm trying to say here, but I suppose it does all sort of blend in with the theme of like having to lie and hide your truth, hide who you really are. Overall, I really love this book. I also actually did, saying that, wish, oh my god, my phone, I'm so popular today. Hello? I thought I started this video with so much time before it got dark, but now it's 3:30 and it's getting darker by the second and people keep calling me, so round up this book really quickly. I really enjoyed it. I was going to say that I did wish they kind of delved more into Stella and like how she was able to pass as white so easily. I wish they'd sort of like shown more of that angle of the story, but most of the story was about Desiree and her struggles, and that's just what the book was about. But if Brit Bennett wanted to write another one of these books just focusing on Stella and like her experience, I'd be all there. That'd be really good. I really liked it. And then the next book I read, again on my Kindle, was The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green, which again I gave 3 stars. I found this book really interesting because I think had I read this as like an actual hardback copy of the book, which is what I did originally want, but I couldn't get it for cheap anywhere. I think if I actually read the hardback copy of this book, I might have enjoyed it even more, because my problem with on the Kindle is it's not very easy to switch between chapters. And the entire premise of the Anthropocene Reviewed is that it's essays about things that John Green is interested in, essentially. It's like about things that he wants to talk about and he finds interesting and he wants to research. And that sounds like a fantastic premise for a book, but I think things like that are so personal from person to person. There were certain like essays that John Green wrote that I found so interesting. Like he did one on the plague, he did one on I think meningitis, if I remember correctly. Anything like medical, you know, I'm all there. I find that so interesting. Oh my god, my mother's calling me again. Wait. Hello? Am I ever going to get this video finished? Who knows? What was I saying? Anthropocene Reviewed, good essays when I enjoyed them, but when it was about things that didn't interest me, like physics and space and stuff, can't really say I care that much. I kind of wish I'd been able to just like skip through, whereas if I had like a physical copy of the book, I very easily would be able to do that and just like switch to the chapters that I wanted to read or the essays I wanted to read, whereas when it's in Kindle form, I found that really, really hard. I also think this would be a really interesting like coffee table book to like have on your coffee table and like talk to people about when they come round your house, or if they've like got a particular interest, you can be like, oh, read this essay. Maybe that's really boring. Maybe that is just something that I would love. Most people wouldn't. Imagine going to a social thing and somebody being like, oh yeah, you know this thing you like, read this essay on it. I am the worst. Overall, I did enjoy it, but not every essay interests me, and if I like put it down, I didn't necessarily want to pick it back up again because I was like, oh, I don't really want to finish reading about space. Don't really care about it. But what did interest me, I thought was really good. And then we have The Paris Apartment by Lucy Foley. We all know that I am a big, big fan of Lucy Foley's books. She does a murder mystery like no other. Her style of like murder mystery, I would say, is very similar to like Agatha Christie-esque style mysteries. They're not too convoluted, they're not too complicated. They're just good, solid, usually locked in murder mysteries. This one wasn't so much. Her previous 2 books are The Guest List, which is set on a remote island off the coast of Ireland, and the other one is The Hunting Party, which takes place in a cabin in the woods. It's very much locked in. This one isn't so much, but the premise of this is there's a block of apartments in Paris. I think there's like 5 apartments. And one of the people, Ben, in one of the apartments, turns up dead, and his sister, or doesn't turn up dead, he disappears basically. And his sister is coming to stay with him. When his sister arrives, her brother can't be found anywhere. And everyone who lives in this apartment block becomes a suspect, basically. Each chapter switches between different points of views of like all these different people living in the apartment. You find out how all these people are connected and eventually you're able to narrow down what really happened to Ben. Like, it's just your very classic whodunit. Like, every single chapter ends on a cliffhanger. They're also very short chapters, so that really, really keeps you turning that page. Like, you can easily read this in one night. Like, I know it's a really, really thick book, but the chapters are really short. It's really compelling. It's a real page turner. You can just sit there and knock this out in one evening. It is so good. It's very slow build tension. It's very creepy. What you think is happening is never what's actually happening. I just really, really love Lucy Foley's writing. No matter what she writes, I'm going to read it, as long as it's in this genre. No matter what murder mystery she writes, I'm going to read it, and I'm probably going to enjoy it. And whilst we're on the topic of sort of murdery, mystery kind of books, we have A Perfect Wife by J.P. Delaney. This is not what I thought it was going to be about at all, and had I known what this book was going to be about, I never in a million years would have picked this up. Saying that, it was okay. Again, another 3 stars. Didn't hate it, didn't love it. Thought it was very like meh. it wasn't a waste of time. I just wouldn't have chosen to read this. Basically, the blurb reads, Abby wakes up in a hospital bed with no memory of how she got there. By her side is her husband Tim, the driven British founder of one of the world's most groundbreaking tech companies. They met when she joined his startup as artist in residence, their marriage a Silicon Valley fairy tale. But as Abby's memories return, she realises there's something missing from Tim's version of events, because 5 years ago, Abby Cullen Scott was pronounced dead. Dun dun dun. Like, that's compelling, right? It is, only you find out in literally the first chapter, so this is not a spoiler, that Abby, like this Abby who's woken up from this like medical coma or whatever you think it is, she's actually like a robot. She's like AI. It's very sci-fi. I hate sci-fi. I do not do sci-fi. Don't enjoy it in books, don't enjoy it in movies, don't enjoy it in TV. Not my kind of thing. Had I known that, I would not have picked this book up. So basically, Abby wakes up after having a dream about her wonderful husband, and she learns very quickly that she's not the real Abby, and she's basically being brought back to life so her husband, her creepy ass husband, can basically look at his beautiful wife. There's so much sort of emphasis put on throughout this book how beautiful Abby was, how she was so fit, she had this beautiful hair, like she's really like tall and skinny and like had all these like beautiful, wonderful physical attributes that actually felt a little bit misogynistic to me. Like by halfway through the book I was like, okay, we get it, Abby's beautiful, we know, can we like learn about who she is as a person, please? Like I feel like you finish this book knowing that Abby was a beautiful person, but you don't actually know much about her, which is really, really funny, because the entire premise of the book is like Abby getting back her memories and piecing what happened to her like actual real human body. With of course like the main mystery here being like, did Tim, the husband, kill his wife? Is robot Abby in danger? What happened to real Abby? That kind of thing. Like this is definitely a very thought-provoking book for sure. Like it really makes you think about some really like moral dilemmas. Does Abby, the robot Abby, have the rights, the same rights as a human person? Because she feels like human. She has all of Abby's, like real Abby's thoughts and emotions and feelings, but because she's a robot, does she not count as a person? Like it really does bring up some like very interesting talking points, RE, like AI and that kind of thing. I feel like I've played a video game recently called Detroit Become Human, which is a very similar concept to this, about whether like AI people, AI robots, AI creations count as real humans or not. Should they be given the same rights as humans if they've got the same thoughts, feelings and emotions as humans? I also watched Humans recently. I think it's a BBC show, but it's on Netflix, very good. It felt like the same as both them. It was like very samey, and I don't know which one of those came first, but because I read this one last, it's probably the one that I enjoyed the least. Oh, and alongside the weird misogyny throughout this book, there's also, it seemed very ableist, and I don't say that lightly. Abby and Tim's son basically is very, very autistic, and he gets put through this awful, like, schooling technique, I suppose, to, like, make him less autistic, or, like, to fix him is the basic premise of that. Again, like I was saying with the Sayaka Murata one, convenience store woman, I'm not autistic myself. I don't know how autistic people would feel about that. And like part of this storyline is that Abby doesn't like the teachings that her son's going through, so she fights back against it. But it felt very weird to me. It felt very off. Like I spent a lot of this book feeling very uncomfortable about what I was reading and like the wording that was used. Overall, I think maybe 3 stars is a bit too much for this book. Maybe like 2.5 stars. Did I finish it? Yes. Did I really enjoy it? I don't think so. And then we have Red at the Bone by Jacqueline Woodson. Again, this is another one I picked up at that book warehouse thing that I mentioned previously. I'd never heard of this, but I did actually quite enjoy this. I gave this like a 3.5 stars. It wasn't perfect, but it was a quick read and I enjoyed what it gave me. Saying that, I struggled to remember what the actual plot was about. I think this is about a character called Melody. The opening chapter of this is like Melody getting ready for her coming of age party that her family throws for every teenager when they hit like 16. And it's the story of Melody like getting ready for this, and she's wearing a dress, or is supposed to be wearing a dress that her mother was supposed to wear at her own coming of age party, only her mother found out that she was pregnant with Melody before this party ever got to happen, so her mother never got to wear the dress. So it's like quite a poignant moment in their life where Melody gets to wear the dress that her mother never got to wear. And this is very much a generational story. It sort of spans 3 generations, maybe even 4. It's the grandparents, Melody's mum, and then Melody herself, basically going through life, how they ended up where they ended up, how the things that happened to them ended up happening. So you've got Melody, who ends up in like a same-sex relationship and the struggles that come along with that. You've got her mum, who was a teenage pregnancy. She was a teenage pregnancy, who had a teenage pregnancy, and like all of the struggles that came along with that, how the whole family had to move out of the neighbourhood they lived in and moved somewhere else completely, so they weren't judged for this teenage pregnancy. Then you've got the grandparents and all of the pressures they had to go through in their relationship, all like racism and classism and all this stuff. Basically, this whole book is about the choices that you make, the choices that the generations above you make, and how that's affected your life today, how you exactly have ended up where you've ended up. This is very poignant and very thought-provoking. Like, the author, Jacqueline Woodson, is clearly an incredibly talented writer. Like, she paints such a story. I just wish it had gone deeper. Like, it's a very, very short book, and I feel like so much more could have been explored in these stories, but instead, because it's so short, it kind of just brushes over like the very surface level of the stories. Also, it features so much trauma in one single book, and like, I understand what she was trying to do. So it features the Tulsa race massacre. It even goes up to like Melody's grandparents' mother, I think, who escaped from Tulsa during the race massacre. I did do a video about that on my main channel not long ago, so I'll link that somewhere. So it talks about the Tulsa race massacre, but also it talks about 9/11, and there's just a lot of really, really heavy things in this book, and it's kind of like the author wanted to like weave in as much trauma as she possibly could, whereas in reality the actual like generational trauma itself is probably enough. But like, I see where she was going with this book, and it was a good read. I just wish she'd gone even deeper into it. I think if she did mention all these different like traumas, like 9/11 and the Tulsa race massacre, like I said, but she dove more into that, I think it would have made a lot more sense. But instead it's kind of like brushed over, like it's just like a sprinkling of all these terrible things that keep happening without ever like really delving down below the surface. I really hope that makes sense. Like, in this book, I wrote a list. You've got racism, sexuality, dealing with death and grief, teenage pregnancy, gentrification, sort of like money troubles and money trauma, and there's just so many things in such a short book. But also, I think one of the reasons why I struggled with it feeling so like surface level is because, again, it's so short. You never really get to know the characters very well. It sort of jumps between different point of views quite often, and it never really properly introduces each character. You're sort of like expected to figure it out as the reader who each character is, how they're relevant to the story, and it sort of takes away a bit from the enjoyment of the storyline, I found. What else is on my list? I've written, was always confused about characters and timeline because nothing is properly introduced. It's very sort of disconnected. Disconnected, I think, is the main word I would use to describe this. I sound like I'm really criticising this book. I actually did quite enjoy it. I gave it 3.5 stars. I thought it had the bones of what would have been a fantastic like 5-star read. It just didn't quite reach it. But I did enjoy it. Believe it or not, I really did enjoy it. It was also longlisted for the Women's Fiction Prize in 2020, so that's good. And then finally, a load of books, which I actually forgot to get down because, I don't know, I just forgot, are these. The Heartstopper graphic novels, of course. What can I say? 5 stars all around. I love these books. If you don't know what Heartstopper is, you probably have been living under a rock, I would say. Heartstopper was recently made into a Netflix TV show, which is just a wonderful, wonderful adaptation. It's probably one of the best sort of like book to movie, or no, not movie, book to TV adaptations that has been around in a really, really long time. Heartstopper is a graphic novel series about 2 boys called Nick and Charlie, and they go to the same school and they get sat together in their new form room, and they begin a relationship. Like, it's such a lovely, wonderful slow burn as they both like realise they're falling for each other. Charlie is very much out of the closet. He was outed the year before and like everyone in school knows he's gay. Nick isn't. Nick doesn't even realise he's gay himself. He's a rugby boy. He very much like has to live up to the standards that society expects of like a rugby boy, and like he's never thought he's anything but straight. And then Charlie comes along and just throws his whole world on its head. And this isn't a story of queer trauma. This isn't like upsetting in any way. It's just lovely and light-hearted and wonderful in every way. Like, Nick obviously does go through all the heartache of having to like figure out that you're gay, and there's a wonderful scene in both the graphic novel and in the TV series where he's like googling, am I gay? How do I know I'm gay? And that moment just like hits me in the chest every single time. So it's just so true to life. Alice Oseman, who wrote these or drew these, I suppose, she just gets it. She gets the queer experience on just the completely correct level. So you've got Heartstopper number 1, where they've met and they're like slowly falling for each other. You've got Heartstopper 2, where they actually go to France on a school trip, and it's about Nick and Charlie, or Nick himself, I suppose, coming out to people, and Nick and Charlie making their relationship known. It's wonderful. You've got Heartstopper number 3, which I actually can't remember what it's about. It's just about life, just being a couple, being together, being out, loving each other. And then you've got Heartstopper number 4, which is actually quite a lot darker than the rest. I will preface, like, Heartstopper is such like a wonderful light-hearted series, and then you get to 4 and you're like, scary things are happening. Like, it like covers some really dark things that teenagers have to deal with, but I did still think it was absolutely wonderful. I will say it's probably my least favourite of the 3. Actually, maybe even the dark things happen in the 3rd one. It might be the 3rd one. I can't really remember, if I'm being honest with you, but it's one of these 2. It just covers some really, really heavy topics, which I think when you're used to like the lightheartedness of Heartstopper, and then suddenly it gets quite dark, you're like, oh, and these characters that you love so much and they're hurting, and it just makes you really upset. I literally cried, I'm not going to lie to you. But they're wonderful. They literally take like half an hour each to read. You can get through the whole series in one sitting if you wish to, although I would recommend just spacing it out just so you can enjoy them for longer. And also watch Heartstopper on Netflix. It's wonderful and it's lovely, and I enjoyed it so much. Heartstopper Series 1 on Netflix covers, I'd say, the first volume and a half of this. And I would assume that the next series is going to cover volumes 2 and 3, I would guess, but we'll see. Alice Oseman is also writing the 5th book in the series, or drawing the 5th book in the series, and which I suppose will probably be out some point next year, and I'm going to be really sad because it's the last one and I don't want it to end, but yeah, it's just lovely. And with that, it is getting darker and darker in here, and I need to go to the yard to do my horse, so I'm going to say goodbye very quickly. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what books you've read recently that you really enjoy, or what books you've read recently that you think I would enjoy. I am going to do like a 2022 reading roundup. I might literally rank every single book I read this year, but do you want that in like a tier ranking kind of way, or do you want me to literally best to worst talk about every single book in a speedy way? I don't know. I'm pondering on it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.